Spinoza is an interesting character. He was a Portuguese Jew, lived in Amsterdam in the 1600s, and his family had fled the Inquisition from Portugal to the Netherlands. He was a lens grinder by trade, and I think sometimes this very sort of crafty artisanal practice is forgotten when thinking about Spinoza. He had some rather radical ideas, not only for his times but for any times, I think. So one of these, welcome, reminds me of a club I used to go to in the 90s called Eurobeat 2000. You know, it was techno and futurist. Anyway, back to Spinoza. Yes, so he was a lens grinder and a philosopher, and he came up with some ideas that led him to be, I don't know what the word is for the Jewish community, but it was sort of excommunicated, whatever the word might be. He was shunned by the community, and he wasn't allowed to participate in any of the rituals. He was excommunicated in advance by the local Protestant community, even though he never said he wanted to turn up, but they just sort of said, no, you're not welcome. Some of his ideas were really, really radical. One of them was that there is no distinction between mind and body. It's all the same stuff. You see one or the other depending on what you're focusing on in a particular moment. So thinking and acting are the same thing. One you see materially and one you might see thoughtfully. Okay. And he also said that that was all God, all of this stuff, which made him seem very sort of pantheistic, and maybe any Buddhists in the room might see some resonances there. With this, he also had a very particular idea of what the body was. And he talks about this in his book called The Ethics, which is why I'm going to bring it to you right now. So he says there's two things that are really important when considering bodies. One is that they are massively interconnected, and all of the particles, which themselves can be thought of as just other bodies, right, just a smaller scale, all of these networked particles are moving or not, and they are speedy or slow or at rest. Nothing about form, nothing about function. This is really radical, and why I would sometimes also talk about this stuff to product and industrial designers. Think not ever about form and function. Think only of the speeds and slownesses of the particles of the things that you are in the middle of. This does mean then that we are always in the middle. We're always in the middle of massive connections, right? The second thing is that our moving or rest, our speeds or slownesses are put into motion, or not, by our relationships with other bodies. This, I think, is really amazing. This amazes me. We are always what the philosopher, the more contemporary French philosopher Gilles Deleuze would say, we are in the middle. We never start anything. We are always in the middle. We take up or lay down rhythms, Deleuze says, which I always liked because I used to be a DJ. I like this idea of taking up or laying down rhythms and always being in the middle of them. This means that our bodies, which are also ourselves, our minds, just thought of differently, right? But this means that our bodies are affected by and affect others. Affect, right? right? And our bodies have a capacity for being affected. So we're open to it or not, right? And to affecting others. And why I think this is interesting in this sorts of discussion is not simply because it comes from his book on ethics, but it has a really different view of ethics, which is that what makes us us is our relationships with everyone else. Always. And we are massively entangled with everyone else and everything else. And we are open or closed. We push or we feel, right? And that means that all of our actions have impacts on others, right? And that ethics would be a taking account of the impact of our actions on other people, but also where that places us and the type of person that we are or might become as a consequence of this massively entangled interaction where we are feeling and causing feelings, so to speak. And this is why when I would talk to the innovation management students, I would say that management is always ethical. It is an ethical act because it's about relationships and it's about decision making and responsibilities for actions that are taken or avoided or blocked. And this is super, super important. Not only because it's about accounting for the impacts of our decision making on others, but also because it situates us within that, right? So Spinoza's ethics is what in philosophy would be called not ontological relational ethics. So we've already talked about the relationality, or I've mentioned it. The ontological nature is that this is about what exists, and how that may change or become. You cannot divorce these things. And this is really important. So being careful, taking care, is also being understanding the value and the power of your decisions that you make, but also almost in accounting for the impact and the pressure of your actions, your decisions on other people. This, I think, I find this a much more, maybe it's just simply a personal thing, but I find this a much more powerful understanding of ethics than what we may think of as organising our lives to be good against an externally constructed set of rules, which I would think of as morality, really, which I think is quite different to ethics. So this idea that there's a the Greek root to ethics, ethos, about character, about human character, I think sort of comes back a little bit. But especially about you. And when you're doing research, when you're constructing a research project, if it involves participants, people who are going to be really important in order for you to further your project, you need to take care of them. That's not such a big deal, I don't think. Taking care of the people who are important to you. But that's also you, right? So when you think about your projects and you think, am I asking someone to do something that is beyond what they would normally do? Am I asking them to encounter memories or feelings that could be problematic for them? in doing that, am I putting myself in a position which could be problematic or impactful? And that's when you care for yourself. So a researcher should always take care, including yourself. It may be that we can think that what we're going to ask some of our participants to do is to cast various parts of their bodies that will then go on show for a talk about thinking about how we might think of new technologies and body enhancements. Fine, you can think about that. But are you going to put yourself in a difficult position? If you are going to think that you are going to investigate political graffiti in Aleppo, in Syria, you may not be asking anybody else to do anything that puts them at risk, but you might be putting yourself at risk, right? So think about what that means and treat yourself ethically, as well as all the other selves that you are constructing through your work.